It's important we look at the facts. Why?
Douglas Ross is sounding pretty scared.
As I believe in independence.
And he clapped like a seal.
Hello and welcome to another Planet Holyrood. I'm Paul Hutcheon, political editor of the Daily Record. Joining me this week are regulars Hannah Rodger, who's the chief reporter of the Sunday Mail, Douglas Dickie of the Scottish Daily Express. So I made this point before. The name of the podcast suggests that we mostly focus on Holyrood, which is correct, but Scottish politics is wider than what happens in Edinburgh. And it'd be fair to say that the main issue this week so far is the farce of what happened in the House of Commons last night on the SNP-led Gaza debate. Regardless of your perspective, I think it'd be fair to say it wasn't anyone's finest moment. Hannah, just starting with you, it used to be your day job to cover Westminster, so you'll be well used to Westminster madness. Can you just run through what happened last night and why is it important?
Well, where do you want me to start? So I'll start at, for the basics, right? So you've got opposition day debates. The SNP gets 3 of these a year. And it's meant to give, members of the opposition party a chance to talk about an issue that they feel strongly about, that maybe it is not getting enough kind of airtime within the normal sort of government period. So, I think we can all agree that this issue, it's not like no one's been talking about Gaza or anything, but I think the SNP probably wanted to make a political point in terms of bringing this to the House with their opposition day debate. And I think they probably saw it as a bit of a chance. Feel free to correct me if you disagree, but they probably did see it as a bit of a chance to kind of test Labour as well, because they knew that Labour was still on the fence as to whether it was going to support a ceasefire or not. So that's why the SNP put forward this debate. And of course, there was the SNP's motion attached to the debate, which was calling for an immediate ceasefire. Now, normally what happens in these debates, it should be said as well, they've got no sort of, they have no impact on government policy. It really is a sort of chance for parties to set their position out on things. So it was never going to impact government sort of policy or the legislation. But so what normally happens is the opposition party whose debate it is, they put forward a motion. The government are allowed to put forward their, amendments or their own motion, and then MPs will vote on whichever they feel is, suits them. But in this case, Labour wanted to put forward an amendment to the SNP's motion, which was an immediate ceasefire. And that was because Labour essentially were saying that, they didn't feel as if that reflected their party's position. And behind the scenes, Keir Starmer was very worried that it was going to show, a weakness of his leadership. And he wanted to give his MPs something that they could vote for that wouldn't force them to break the whip of the party. So does that make sense? Are you with me so far?
Yeah, absolutely. The SNP, Hannah, are saying that they were stitched up last night by the Speaker and by Labour.
So this is where it kind of became, this is where the shenanigans began. So normally, as I said, there's 2 motions. There's no sort of, another opposition party gets to put amendments and things like that. That's not how this works. But what we saw last night was Lindsay Hoyle came to the House and he said, I'm going to allow a vote on Labour's amendment to the SNP motion. And because it was a Labour amendment to the motion, the Labour amendment got heard first. So Labour could vote on that as they wanted to. And this is where it gets quite technical and a bit nerdy, but I'm quite interested in it, is the Labour amendment essentially removed a lot of the words from the SNP's original motion So it meant that the SNP was not able to vote for its own motion in its own debate, because the Labour motion, or the Labour amendment, which changed the SNP's motion, passed already. So it basically took off the SNP's motion from its own debate. So that pissed off the SNP. Obviously, Lindsay Hoyle, very well respected, experienced speaker, quite popular. However, he is a Labour MP, and there's suggestions that he was leaned on by the Labour Party to allow them to discuss their amendment, which is completely unprecedented. It doesn't happen. And this is what this whole chaos is about. So then last night we had the Tories, the government, essentially the Tories, withdrawing from the whole escapade, because they said, he's defied convention and he has, done something which is in support of his own party, not what they're supposed to do. We're having no part in this. The SNP were pissed off because they didn't get to vote for their own motion. And it just descended into absolute chaos. And as of, about 1 hour ago, I think we've got 59 votes in support of a no confidence motion in the Speaker. You've got calls for the Speaker to resign. You've got calls for an investigation into, the discussions that were had with Labour and the Speaker prior to his decision, because it also should be said that the Speaker defied not only convention, but his own sort of clerk's advice by allowing this to take place. So the question really is, why? Now, sorry, I feel like I'm speaking an awful lot, but it's just because there was a lot to get through. Now, it should be said, Lindsay Hoyle's reason for doing this was he felt like MPs had to be given the opportunity to vote on a range of views and motions and amendments. And there is a suggestion that basically MPs were being threatened within their constituencies if they were not able to vote for something that their constituents could go along with. Their safety could be at risk. So that seems to be what the explanation is for this, unofficially. But
do you think that the SNP have got a legitimate grievance and how they've been treated?
Well, it's hard to say, because the SNP believe that this was a politically motivated decision, and therefore, yes, of course, they can have a grievance. But ultimately, it's parliamentary kind of hijinks, and their very important debate has been completely, knocked to the ground. So, whether it's a legitimate grievance or not, I can see why they would be very annoyed about it. But I think their grievance is because they believe that it was a politically motivated decision by the Speaker, and that's a really, really serious charge for somebody who's meant to be neutral. Sorry, I'm going to shut up now.
I'll come to you on the Speaker, Dougie, just later, but just on the sort of shenanigans last night, clearly passions were high, a lot of heat in this debate, a lot of pissed off people. But how much do you think it actually annoys members of the public? Because what we're essentially talking about here is motions and amendments, politicians. Voters probably expect it to be hijinks and dirty tricks in the House of Commons. Do you think this is going to have cut through?
Yeah, but by the way, it's a great question, Paul. It's a great point. The amount of people I've heard, I've seen speak about this since, saying we wish MPs were so passionate about tackling the cost of living crisis, about energy prices. It was Westminster at its worst, to be honest, and I don't think anyone comes out of it particularly well. And I think the simple fact of the matter is, Gaza is obviously a really important subject, a really important, event that's happening in the world right now. I think most people, regardless of original thought on it, look at the Israeli action and think, the time's come where we need to pause this and we need to see where this goes long term. I think people can get on board with that, but ultimately, that's it's not going to make your shopping bill any cheaper at the end of the week.
Well, no, but it was never. That debate was never designed to be about the cost of living.
Exactly, but I think the point is, as Paul asked, is this going to cut through to the public? And anyone who's got such a strong feeling on Gaza and Israel, it wasn't going to be swayed by that. And I don't think anyone else who maybe doesn't have as strong a view on it is going to be impressed with it at all. I thought, Hannah, I thought you're very diplomatic when you were talking about the SNP's reasons, motives behind the motion. It was clearly an attempt to make life difficult for Labour. It was obvious that's what it was about. The motion, which was pretty flimsy, in all honesty, was clearly written in such a way that Labour couldn't back in its current form, and I think it's made a difficult situation for the SNP. I think Labour will be reasonably happy that they've kind of saw off a potential rebellion. I think the Tories will secretly be like, this is quite good. We can have a go at Lindsay Hoyle. We can have a go at Keir Starmer for allegedly putting pressure on the Speaker, or that's someone that's something Keir Starmer denies. But for the SNP at the end of it, I think they've been they were completely outflanked and they were completely caught in the hop. And I think procedurally they do have reason to feel aggrieved because the rules were broken. But they now find themselves in a really difficult position where they're backing motions signed by the likes of Lee Anderson to kind of get rid of the Speaker, although that motion as well is not going to have any difference either because it's an LED motion. But I think ultimately,
something I don't actually. I agree that the primary motivation was to embarrass Labour, but I don't have a problem with that because politicians behave in political ways. The House of Commons is a political chamber. I'm not naive. Well, that's what politicians do, but I'm not going to be sort of conscripted into believing that the primary motivation was about the Middle East when I just don't believe it was.
No.
I think that SNP... Say that again, sorry?
I was going to I forgot to send this to our wonderful production team prior to the broadcast, but I will say if there's any doubt that this was not politically motivated, I was quite appalled at Pete Wishart last night, and I don't know if anyone can actually see this. Can you see what it says? It says tweet.
If you're watching the proceedings in the House of Commons, don't get angry, join the SNP instead.
I mean,
it wasn't just Pete
on
Wishart.
one hand you've got the SNP saying, "Oh, this is about Gaza," and and then on the other hand you've got Pete Wishart tweeting that. I just thought that's appalling, really is. But anyway, sorry, I've interrupted again.
No, you're right. Labour are ahead in the polls. The SNP are worried about that, and they see this as an issue on which to kind of embarrass Labour. I'm not naive about that. That's what politicians do, and good luck to them. But I think we have to be kind of honest about what the primary motivation was in this instance. It hasn't quite worked for the SNP. It does seem like there's a lot of jiggery-pokery. The Speaker clearly has questions to answer about his role. Dougie, do you think that he's vulnerable?
Yeah, I think he is. Yeah, I do. I definitely think he is. I mean, we can sit here and argue over the kind of jiggery-pokery off it. And ultimately, I think the one thing that might save him is I think your average member of the public who maybe doesn't know, what goes on at Westminster in quite the same detail as someone like, yourself or Hannah, they'll be sitting there thinking, well, why couldn't they just vote on the Labour amendment? Why couldn't they just, hear every side of it? And I think, like I say, he might be able to ride it out, if only because to the general public, this is going to be, chip wrapper in a few days. It's got a lot of political geeks like ourselves very, very excited, and it was quite exciting. I mean, let's be honest here, we all love a good Barney. Of course we do. It makes great copy. It makes great chat, when we come on here. So, but in a few days, it may well have kind of dissipated. But ultimately, Lindsay Hoyle needs to answer why. Well, he's tried to explain why he broke. These.
Well, I think he has tried.
That makes him vulnerable. Yeah, definitely.
But I also think it's going to be this whole saga, right? We've seen. I was watching Business Questions in the Commons that was on this morning, where they were talking about this, and to be honest, it was the Tories and the SNP kind of forming this weird alliance against Lindsay Hoyle, but some senior Tories now seem to be stepping back from that and being a lot more reasoned about it. And I feel like it's going to end up basically the SNP versus Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker. And I feel like the SNP will use this as a technique to say, look at this example. This is why Westminster doesn't give a jot about Scotland's views, and they'll just use this as a tool, political tool. And fair play to them if they do that. But yeah, I don't feel like Lindsay Hoyle is at risk, to be honest.
I think that the next couple of days, it might be quite tough for him, and if he survives the next couple of days, I think he'll be fine. Because as you say,
there's like a WhatsApp from Keir Starmer saying, if you don't let this amendment through, you're toast.
I know, exactly. And as you say, a couple of Tories are backing away now. I don't know. Who knows?
I did see someone on social media suggest Ian Blackford comes in as his replacement until the general election. I don't know.
Well, I think he's definitely safe then. Lindsay Hoyle, I don't think he's going anywhere if Ian Blackford is the plan B. Sticking with the SNP, Hannah, the story that never dies, Operation Branchform. There was a story this week that staff are to be re-interviewed by the police as part of this investigation into SNP finances. Hannah, when's this bloody thing going to end?
Look, you tell me. I don't know. I think that, initially we thought, right, they're taking it very seriously. They're finding things that maybe they weren't initially looking for, and that's why this is taking so long. But the longer it goes on, the more, and I've heard quite a few people say this, they would be surprised if there's going to be any charges brought because, given the amount of time that's passed since those initial arrests and now, it just seems, I don't know. I mean, that's the problem. We don't really know exactly.
Everyone's got an opinion on this,
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's the cops who know what's going on.
Yeah.
It's the Crown Office that knows what's going on. And everyone else...
And I would say John Ferguson.
John Ferguson as well, yeah.
Knows what's going on.
John Ferguson, the Crown Office and Police Scotland. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dougie, I mean, clearly the cops have done a thorough job, haven't they? I mean, no one can accuse them of, sweeping this under the carpet or just ticking boxes. They've really investigated these allegations thoroughly.
Yeah, I think, I mean, me, Paul, I always like to talk about Rangers, so I'm going to talk about Rangers here. And I think I know it's Crown Office here, but those kind of malicious prosecution scandal, which has cost the public millions and millions of pounds, the public purse, I think is probably weighing on their mind. And, it's gone on so long. They clearly feel that there's something worth investigating, and I think they're going to make sure that no stone is left unturned. Because then, regardless of how this pans out, they'll be able to go back and say that we there could be no question marks over how we done our job. The cynic in me, election year coming up, maybe they don't want to rock the boat before a vote, either way, or maybe they're going to wait to the day before the election before there's a development. It's gone on so long. The public deserve answers, and ultimately those the people who have been charged deserve answers as well. They deserve to know, Nicola Sturgeon-Combie and Peter Murrow. They deserve.
Well, no, they haven't been charged. Remember?
Oh, sorry. Pardon me, not charged. Arrested, but obviously really high-profile arrests, and in this country, we act on the assumption of innocence until proven otherwise, and so they deserve a conclusion to this part of the investigation, one way or the other. And like you say, God knows when we're going to get it.
And the thing is, Dickie, the longer it goes on, and I'm not critical of the cops or the Crown Office in any way over this, I don't think political consideration should any bearing whatsoever on their investigation. That's for other folk. But looking at it in a purely party political context, the longer it goes on, it could become a general election issue.
Well, the closer we get to the general election, the bigger political impact, whatever the next stage of this is going to have. And, I just have these images of something happening the day before. We go to the polls, and either way, people say, oh, well, there wasn't enough time for the impact. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think there's any political consideration to it. I just think they want to be really thorough after previous disasters with the Rangers stuff. But it's going to be a general election issue one way or the other. In some ways, in a bizarre kind of way for the SNP, the best thing that might happen is for charges of some sort to be brought, because then it kind of becomes a court issue, and then everything
then you can
kind of goes into the background. Whereas even if charges aren't brought, there continues to be question marks, and it seems like a complete mess, to be honest. And I think, like I say, I think everyone in the country deserves a conclusion to it one way or another. And as I say, including the 3 people who've been arrested in relation to it.
Hannah, just another SNP related issue. Last year, at the SNP conference, they voted through a new Indy Ref 2 policy, which was that if they won a majority of Scottish seats at the general election, they would consider that to be a mandate or Indy Ref 2, or some way of taking forward the independence issue. Humza Yousaf said this week that it would be most seats rather than a majority of seats, which is a lower bar. Was that just a sort of verbal slip up, or was it a sort of intentional shifting in the goalposts, do you think?
Well, I've looked at I think he was asked about this afterwards, and he didn't directly correct himself. He didn't say, oh yes, sorry, I meant majority, but I said most. So it's left everyone a bit confused, but clearly the party voted at their own conference for a majority. So I don't think, even if they don't get a majority but they get the most, surely they couldn't just say at that point, oh well, that's fine, we've got a mandate now. Like, they would be a complete laughing stock.
I know.
Whatever
you think about the policy, it's not clear, is it, Hannah? It's just I don't think the average person could tell you what the SNP's independence policy is just now.
Well, no, but I don't think they could say, oh yes, I heard that at the SNP conference they voted for a majority of seats means a mandate. I don't think people are aware of that. I think the general public just think, oh, the SNP are just campaigning all the time for independence. And let's face it, the SNP can vote and decide whatever way they want. That, they could decide that if we get one MP in Westminster, it means that we've got a mandate. It doesn't actually mean anything. It's kind of like this nonsense in the House of Commons. It doesn't mean anything at this point.
I know. You take it to its logical conclusion. The SNP lose 20 seats at the general election. A terrible result. But they still somehow have the most seats. Then it's roll on Indy Ref 2? Come on. It's not even drivel.
Well, but we're also forgetting that to hold another referendum requires, unless there's some massive change in the law, requires permission from the UK government, and that is not forthcoming anytime soon. So, these conversations are almost redundant.
Dougie, do you not get the impression that these conversations, whether it's a majority or most, this is the SNP focused on their core supporters. They're not talking to average voters here who are sort of politically in the middle of the road, who could go either way. They're effectively talking to themselves with this.
Yeah, I think one of the important things that we've seen in the past year is that the link between support for the SNP and support for independence is being broken. And I think this is Humza Yousaf's way of throwing a bit of red meat to those who are still, sticking by the SNP cause, if you like. I mean, this was really, I was actually embarrassed for him watching it, and I was even more embarrassed watching his attempts to clarify it, which he just didn't do. I asked the SNP to kind of respond to it, and they just came back, and it was kind of like, well, a majority is most, so stands to reason that most is a majority. Yeah,
No, they're not the same.
I know.
I had to watch the interview I had to go over that moment 3 times to make sure I was hearing things right, and it was just awful, and it's a desperate attempt to try and get make sure that no more potential SNP voters are thinking, you know what, this is a dead duck. I might support Scottish independence, but for the time being, it's not happening. I'm going to go elsewhere and see what we can do to bring about change in other ways. He looked really, really desperate. I think his authority's been damaged by it. How can we trust this guy when he doesn't even know his own policy? It was a real blunder, one of the worst blunders I think he's made, and that is saying something coming from me, because everything he does is a blunder to us.
I think the worst blunder is my favourite topic, Michael Matheson.
Wow.
But anyway.
Well, apparently Michael Matheson needs more time to read the corporate body report. I mean, I'm not sure what he's got to say that's going to.
I do admire loyalty to your friends, but ridiculous.
We were going to discuss NHS, but I think we've run out of time. So let's just go straight to good week, bad week. Starting with you, Hannah.
My good week this week is our old friend Douglas Ross, fan of the show. Hello, Douglas. And he's had a good week because as he is in this unique position of having 2 jobs as an MP and an MSP, he managed to avoid all the Westminster nonsense last night because he was actually up the road at Holyrood. So I think he's probably had a pretty good week because he's not had to face any awkward questions about that. And my bad week is going for the obvious, but Lindsay Hoyle, and also by extension probably the whole of the House of Commons, but specifically Lindsay Hoyle, he's just not. I think he maybe did try to do something that he thought was right, but it's just ended up in a bit of a farce.
It's funny because like the whole Gaza debate, I never really expected the end of that to be a focus on Lindsay Hoyle in the doghouse. And suddenly his job's on the line. It's just like, I know, God, bizarre. Dougie, how about you? Good week, bad week?
I'll start with bad week because I mean we were spoiled for choice. We could have picked literally every
anyone
in the country this week, but I've pumped for Stephen Flynn, SNP group leader at Westminster. I thought he looked pretty uncomfortable on oil and gas earlier in the week. Obviously, he represents a North East constituency, and even though Humza Yousaf's come out against Labour's kind of windfall tax, I think the whole SNP policy in North Sea oil and gas is all over the shop. And it's obviously going to be North East MPs who potentially pay the price. So I don't think Stephen Flynn's in any danger of losing his seat, but possibility there that SNP hopes taking some seats from the Tories up there might be impacted. He also was outflanked, I thought, by Labour on the Gaza stuff ultimately, and his toys out the pram reaction to it. I don't think I've done him any favours. But for good week, I've also picked Stephen Flynn.
I think you should not be allowed to do this.
This is unprecedented in the history of Planet Holyrood.
I think, despite what I've just said, he has managed to get the SNP at the front of the news agenda UK-wide, and that's something that his boss could only dream of, I think, unless he'd done something ridiculous. So I think ultimately...
I get the impression, Dougie, you don't like Ian Blackford. I don't know why.
No, sorry, his boss. I meant his boss.
Right, sorry.
Boss, sorry, pardon me.
I take that back. I take back that slur.
Oh no, listen, I'm right behind Ian Blackford for Speaker. Let's make it happen just for the giggles. But to go back to the more serious point, Stephen Flynn is emerging, I think, as the potential replacement for Humza Yousaf if he were to go. People talk about Kate Forbes being on manoeuvres, but I think Stephen Flynn is right now potentially the most recognisable SNP politician in the country. I've also, as in the UK rather than just Scotland, I think as well.
You could see him maybe standing for Holyrood then.
Well, one thing I've always thought, not that I'm wanting to dish out advice to the SNP, but I've always found it slightly strange that their leader sits in Holyrood, because ultimately, if the goal of the SNP is to, make Scotland independent, that can only happen at Westminster. And I think you're seeing that Stephen Flynn has a much bigger impact on UK politics than Humza Yousaf could ever have. And if he was, he would go to Holyrood, obviously, because he would want to be First Minister. But when you're at Holyrood, you're kind of bogged down in the day-to-day issues, and you're bogged down in, let's be honest, crap legislation that Parliament churns out every year. Whereas at Westminster, he's acting with, he's acting with a bit of freedom, and I think he's shown himself, regardless of whether you agree with his politics, he's quite adept at getting his name out there and getting the SNP front and centre of the news agenda. And as I say, I just don't think Humza Yousaf's capable of that.
Obviously, Westminster would never pass crap legislation.
No.
That's just a matter for Holyrood.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but he opposes the crap legislation at Westminster more often than not, whereas at Holyrood he would need to support it. So,
fair enough. All right, I think that's pretty much it. Thanks to Hannah, our resident in-house Westminster boffin, who always shines a light on how that weird place works. And thanks obviously to Dougie as well for his measured comments on the SNP. He likes to just, both sides, like Blackford's side. And
I think I gave Stephen Flynn good and bad week. So
you did. It was very measured. So I hope that you enjoy the episode and that you join us again next week.
It's important we look at the facts. Why?
Douglas Ross is sounding pretty scared.
I believe in independence.
And he clapped like a seal.